on January, it's going to be announced who is going to make the Hall of Fame ballot for 2025. There are a lot of great names who I feel like are deserving to make it to Cooperstown this year, so I'm going to have 10 players on my personal ballot. So if I was a Baseball Hall of Fame voter, here's who I would have in my ballot, starting with number 1, Ichiro Suzuki. Ichiro Suzuki is tied for my favorite player of all time with Carlos Beltran. So it's going to be a nice moment when he inevitably goes into the Baseball Hall of Fame. However, I feel like not only should he be in, but he should also be unanimous. Ichiro Suzuki had a legendary career both in Japan in NPB and in America in MLB. Some impressive awards and accolades he's had throughout his career is an MVP award and a Rookie of the Year award in the same season. Upwards of 500 stolen bases, upwards of a 300 career batting average, more than 3,000 MLB hits, 10 gold gloves at right field, 10-time All-Star, 2 batting titles, 3 Silver Sluggers, a 60 F-WAR, and had 10 straight seasons of 200 or more hits. And his 4,367 professional hits is the most ever by any professional player in baseball history. And even though he didn't hit a lot of home runs during the games, if you saw his batting practices, you know he had true power if he really wanted to. So he truly is a great 5-tool player, and I feel like obviously he's going to make the Hall of Fame, and I'm just hoping it's unanimous. The second player on my ballot would be CC Sabathia. CC Sabathia was a dominant flame-throwing pitcher when he was in Cleveland and Milwaukee, and his first few years in a Yankee uniform. However, he had to reinvent himself in the second part of his career, and he did so successfully, which prolonged his career and allowed him to accumulate a lot of nice stats. He was a throwback pitcher in a sense that he always threw a lot of innings and he went deep into games, and he was a reliable workhorse ace in a generation where that was slowly dying out and fizzling out. Even though his 3.74 ERA might be high for some people's liking, a portion of his career was played during high run-scoring environments. And he also played in the AL East, which has some ballparks that are really easy to hit home runs in. He also makes up for it in the fact that he pitched a lot of innings throughout his career and has had a lot of strikeouts also. He pitched more than 200 innings 8 times in his career, and his 3,577.1 innings throughout his career is the 64th most in MLB history. He is also part of the 3,000 strikeout club, which only 19 other pitchers are a part of. He's a Cy Young winner, he's a World Series champion, and he had an amazing run in all 3 of his teams that he played for. And he was a true workhorse and ace at a time where the workhorse was dying in MLB. And the greatest embodiment of that was when he was traded to Milwaukee, and it seemed like he was pitching every other day, and he willed that team into the playoffs. The third player on my Hall of Fame ballot would be Billy Wagner. I believe that it's Billy Wagner's 10th and final year on the ballot, so this is his last chance to make it to the MLB Hall of Fame, which is such a shame because I feel like he should already be a Hall of Famer because of how dominant he was throughout his career. However, as we all know, it's very tough for a reliever to make it to the Hall of Fame. At the current moment, there are only 8 closers who are in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I definitely feel like Billy Wagner should be the 9th considering how dominant he was in his generation and in general in terms of relievers and closers. Amongst pitchers who have had at least 900 innings pitched in their career since 1920, he ranks 2nd in ERA, 2nd in WHIP, 1st in K per 9, 1st in opponent's batting average, and 2nd in ERA+. In fact, in terms of ERA+, he only ranks 2nd to Mariano Rivera, who was the first ever unanimous Hall of Famer. And he ranks ahead of great pitchers such as Clayton Kershaw, Jacob deGrom, Pedro Martinez, and Joe Nathan. Whatever your argument is, whether he hasn't pitched enough innings or relievers shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, one thing I feel like you can't doubt is his dominance over a long period of time, and I feel like he's one of the best closers of all time and deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. 4th on my Hall of Fame ballot would be Carlos Beltran. Carlos Beltran was a true 5-tool player and is one of the best switch hitters of all time, and he even elevated his game when it mattered most in the playoffs. I believe he, just like Billy Wagner, should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. However, with him, the controversy over the Houston Astros cheating scandal is holding him back in my opinion. Although he was a big part of the Houston Astros cheating scandal, I don't think he's solely responsible for it, and there was a lot of things going on at that time. And I don't think it's fair to throw out his whole career just because of that one incident that he was not fully responsible for. Moving on to talking about his playing career, he was one of the best center fielders of his generation. He was one of the players that can change the game in many ways, whether it was a stolen base threat, making a crazy play on defense, or hitting a bunch of home runs. And there are some very solid stats that he has in his favor to support his Hall of Fame case. Carlos Beltran is one of 5 players in MLB history to have at least 400 home runs and at least 300 stolen bases in their career. His 435 home runs were 4th most in MLB history by a switch hitter. and he has an impressive 16 home runs, a 1.021 OPS in 65 postseason games. So overall, I feel like Carlos Beltran had a Hall of Fame worthy career, and I feel like he belongs in the Hall of Fame. The fifth player on my ballot would be Andruw Jones. It's a shame that a great all-around player like Andruw Jones is not in the Hall of Fame already. He had one of the best peaks in MLB history, in my opinion. In the late 90s, early 2000s, one can argue Andruw Jones was one of the best, if not the best, outfielders both offensively and defensively in the major leagues. At his peak with the Atlanta Braves, he won 10 straight Gold Gloves at center field and accompanied his amazing defense with solid home runs, stolen base, and RBI numbers, and was able to do that while having a solid batting average. He is the true embodiment of a five-tool baseball player. And I get it, after he left the Atlanta Braves, his career was never the same. However, in my opinion, that's no reason to not vote in Andruw Jones into the Hall of Fame. I feel like his peak numbers alone should allow him to be in the Hall of Fame, and his numbers outside of his peak shouldn't be such a detriment. There are so many great players in the Hall of Fame currently who have had great peaks in their careers, and then had a natural decline as they aged, and I feel like Andruw Jones is no different. The sixth player on my ballot would be Mark Burley. At first glance, you might not think he's a Hall of Famer because his numbers don't stand out as much as other people you might think of. However, if you think about the era he pitched in where pitchers were pitching in less and less innings and less games, he truly stood out as a quality workhorse who not only gave you a lot of innings and a lot of games, but he also pitched very well in those games. In fact, in his career, he had 14 seasons where he pitched 200 innings or more, which is the most in the wildcard era since 1994. His 3,283.1 career innings is the second most since 2000, right behind CC Sabathia. And his 214 wins is the fourth most since 2000, right behind CC Sabathia, Justin Verlander, and Zach Greinke. A lot of old school voters will say that 300 wins and 3,000 strikeouts are benchmarks for a Hall of Fame pitcher. However, nowadays with less and less innings pitched by pitchers, I feel like 200 wins is a new 300 wins. So in an era where workhorse pitchers were less and less available, I feel like Mark Burley was a truly unique pitcher, and I feel like he should be in the Hall of Fame. The seventh player on my ballot would be Chase Utley. For some voters, Chase Utley might not have the longevity that they would like to have in a Hall of Fame player. However, when you look at his peak numbers for the Philadelphia Phillies during those championship runs, he was truly one of the best, if not the best second baseman, both offensively and defensively. In fact, in terms of second baseman in MLB history, he's one of 5 second basemen ever to have at least 250 home runs and at least 150 stolen bases in their careers, joining a list of players such as Joe Morgan, Craig Biggio, Ryan Sandberg, and Ian Kinsler. Although his career dropped off after he went from the Philadelphia Phillies to the Los Angeles Dodgers, I felt like he had a great peak where he had great offensive and defensive numbers, and I feel like those peak numbers should be enough to get him into the Hall of Fame. The eighth player on my ballot would be David Wright. I know what you're thinking. David Wright had a great career but was ended really early because of major injuries. However, to make my case for David Wright, I'm going to use a similar case that I did for Chase Utley. Although he was forced to retire early because of back issues, during his 9-year peak when he was at his best, he was one of the best players in MLB. In fact, some of his 9-year peak numbers are very similar to Adrian Beltran's and in some cases are even better. Although he did have inconsistent defense, at times he was great at defense and other times he was not as good. He was a 5-tool player that always stole bases, hit for average, and hit a lot of home runs. And I am a Mets fan and I got to see David Wright play all throughout my childhood, so it is kind of biased. However, when I did watch David Wright play throughout my childhood, I saw a great Hall of Fame player. I saw the captain of the Mets, a true leader on the field, and a great person off the field as well. So although most might not think that he's going to be a Hall of Fame worthy player, from the perspective of a person that lived in New York and watched David Wright play almost every day, I truly feel like he was a Hall of Fame player at his peak. And in my opinion, if you had a long enough peak, I feel like you should be in the Hall of Fame. It doesn't always have to be just accumulative stats that get you in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. The ninth player on my ballot would be Bobby Abreu. Bobby Abreu is another one of those players that don't get enough recognition, in my opinion. I feel like he should definitely be a Hall of Famer considering the accumulation of stats he's had throughout his career. He had almost 300 home runs, stole 400 bases, had a .291 career batting average. And even though he wasn't the best defensively, he still managed to accumulate a 60 WAR. He truly was one of the better hitters of his generation. And I think because he doesn't have a lot of all-star appearances or a lot of silver sluggers or MVPs, he's getting overshadowed by other candidates. However, according to an article by MLB's Brian Murphy, Compared to the other 29 right fielders in Cooperstown, Abreu ranks in the top 10 of on-base percentage, walks, stolen bases, and doubles, and is tied for 11th in extra base hits. His 60.2 BWAR is 15th amongst those right fielders, and it surpasses players such as Vladimir Guerrero and Eno Slaughter, and he also has a higher WAR than Ichiro Suzuki. Now, I'm not saying that WAR is everything and he's better than those players, but I feel like these stats alone shows how underrated Bobby Abreu is and shows that he should be in the Hall of Fame because he ranks right up there with the other right fielders that are already in the Hall of Fame. Even though he doesn't have the accolades that the other players do have, I feel like if you look at the numbers, he truly was a Hall of Fame player. And the 10th and final player on my ballot would be Tory Hunter. I know that some may say that it's a reach, but I feel like Tory Hunter was one of the better all-around players of his generation. He hit over 300 home runs, he stole almost 200 bases, had a decent OPS plus, and accompanied that with amazing Gold Glove defense. He had 9 Gold Gloves, had 36 defensive runs saved at center field, and had 130 plus outfield assists. Although his WAR might not be the highest in terms of Hall of Fame players, I feel like the fact that he dominated center field for 9 years straight, being a generational type defender while being a solid hitter, should be valued more in my opinion. Some honorable mentions I had on my list were Dustin Pedroia, Jimmy Rollins, Felix Hernandez, Omar Vizquel, and Ben Zobrist. So there you have it. That would be my Hall of Fame ballot. Let me know what you think of my list. Let me know who would be in your ballot. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out.